today. I know. So the one thing that we have to discuss, because it keeps coming up on many questions, and it's around low-cost housing, but more specifically RDP housing. So this starts becoming an administrative thing more than anything else. Like, how does government deal with homelessness? How does government deal with allocation of housing or provision of housing? What is this called? What are the rules around it? And most of our questions are around that. Our questions are then around maladministration. So this is what's supposed to happen versus what actually happens. I'm supposed to get a house. I've been waiting 20 years for a house. I did get a house, or I got a phone call that I got a house, but then somebody else was in the house. So that's the maladministration, the actual practical component of the issue. And then obviously the after effect, which is I owned a house, potentially I sold the house. What can I actually do with it? Yeah, so, and those are always the questions that we get. So Cilna, I know that you've been looking at this quite a lot now recently. Do you want to run through those different stages?
Yeah, happy to. Well, actually not happy. It's heartbreaking. The closer I get to these things, the more I realize there are so many things happening that's really heartbreaking. And I'm luckily excited that we can do something about it, even if it is just for the moment. Education around the issue and answering questions. So lately, with my involvement with Rise Mzansi and a few social housing organizations, what I've realized is what's happening currently in the RDP housing arena is absolutely shocking. People that's applied for RDP houses 1996, 1998 still hasn't been allocated RDP houses. So there's the famous Form C, which is the form by which you apply to the Department of Human Settlements for a house. And it seems like there isn't clear guidelines for people once they've applied for housing to know what they should be doing and how they should be following up. Now, I think the first very important thing to know is nothing's going to change. If the situation's been the same for nearly 30 years and you've been waiting for a house for 25 plus years, waiting patiently is probably not the answer. Fantastic if you're that patient, and I'm proud of you, but it's really important to start nagging about it and start following up. But I do appreciate the fact that when you go to the Department of Human Settlements and you say, hey, here's my Form C, I've applied for a house, and the answer is, well, I can't follow up today because whatever, load shedding, systems off, whatever the excuse might be, it becomes tricky. And I actually think we're getting to a point, Bruno, where people need to really understand that it's your right if you've applied for an RDP house and immediately people said, yes, you're on the waiting list. It means you're entitled to that RDP house. And I hate the word entitled.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And entitlement, that's not what it's about. It's about an obligation that our government has, that they have to provide housing to the people that meets the requirements to be allocated RDP houses. Now, what happens is, this is shocking. People very often get informed by the department that they've been allocated houses. So you mentioned a telephone call. I think when that happens, I'm going to be super surprised. But they go and they follow up, and then the person behind the counter says, no, but yeah, next to your name, you've been allocated a house. And then what happens when you do the deed search? You see the property was transferred to a random third party you know nothing about. Sadly, and I think to the attorneys watching, I think very often the assumption is, but it can't just happen that the property was just transferred. Maybe the person sold the property. And sadly, there are more RDP houses that's been transferred to a random third party without the initial beneficiary having any benefit from that house. It was never transferred to them, or it was transferred and then there's a very quick back-to-back transfer. That initial owner, if he tells you he didn't have the benefit of that house, really look into that and do not assume that he had the benefit of that property, because it does unfortunately happen. And I mean, we are living in a situation where corruption, bribery and corruption is unfortunately something very real that's happening. And it does happen that RDP houses gets transferred to third parties that doesn't have the right to receive that property, and the initial beneficiary didn't have any benefit, which means they can't ever again apply for an RDP house. Remember, that's a once off. And it means that they're never going to have that house. But what now? What do we do? Just to see a problem doesn't help me at all. What do we do about it? And I think it's important to know that you can bring a court application if you have all the correct documentation. So please, guys, when you go and you apply for an RDP house, make sure you record everything. You record in a lot of detail what you've done. Make notes. Keep a proper inventory of who you spoke to. Please take names and surnames, who you spoke to, what happened. And then we can bring a court application to compel the department to disclose the full information, as well as the deeds office to disclose the full information. And luckily, in terms of our Deeds Registry Act, if there was a fraudulent transaction, the court can compel the deeds office to reverse that transaction, which puts you back in a position where you can take transfer of the property. Obviously, if it's a fraudulent transaction and it's by way of court order, we can even compel the naughty party to pay not just for the legal costs of the litigation, but also for the transfer costs and the re-registration costs. And if that happens, it brings us to the joyful thing that I love to call an eviction. And we can then evict the party that effectively stole your RDP house from you.
Yeah.
Committed fraud. Look at me now using the term steal. I'm really passionate about this, Bruno. I've been in community conversations, community engagements over the past few weekends, and the amount of people the number of people that's sitting in this situation is heartbreaking. So I'm there where I'm passionately emotional about it, and I am using the term stole your house from you. And I would love to see this situation being rectified as quickly as possible.
No, absolutely. And look, and I suppose that's the thing. It's a dreadful scenario to be in, knowing, especially in a country where housing is an issue, and allowing something like this to happen, because the people that are getting the houses, I mean, if they're being pushed up the list, that's wrong, but at least they were on the list to begin with. Yes. I worry specifically about the situations where the people weren't on the list. The people have the money, or they've applied the money in a specific way, and they're not in as bad a situation as the person on the list was. Also, how long it's taking, the lack of transparency. It's one thing to say, you know what, we need to do it, but we've got certain constraints. So here's a budget that we're putting forward. This is going to be the construction over a period of time. Every year, X amount of houses is going to be made available. And then we're going to transparently, because the funny thing is with things like blockchain technology, as an example, you could take away all human component to this and say, well, as soon as there's a confirmation that a house is done and it's ready, everything else gets done automatically, and you can't manipulate it. It goes to the next person on the list within a specific area, define parameters, there you go, person gets it. And so it's not impossible. This isn't a question of, sure, it's so overwhelming, the administration is super difficult. It really isn't. It really, the thing is, putting the budget together is difficult, sure. Making the tenders, yes, that's difficult. Verifying the house are built in a good order, yes, that's all difficult. But when it comes to associating people with the allocation of housing, the actual transfer to them, honestly, it's not that difficult. So yeah, it is extremely frustrating. So what I'm going to suggest for everyone, if you guys are watching this and you have any, and this might be you, I'm worried about inundation like all over the place, and then us missing messages. So I'm thinking maybe find yourselves back into the Facebook group, and in the Facebook group itself, send through a couple of messages there, or maybe even comment on the video if it is on YouTube, but let's keep it there. So outside of emails and things where we are going to miss it, at least then we get to build up that kind of the comment section, and yeah, and then see what can be done. There's a lot of people out there willing to help. I'm willing to help. Cilna is willing to help. I know advocates that are willing to help. If there's merit for calling an investigation, like you mentioned at the beginning, it's investigate. Like, oh, give us the list then, and let's compare. Yeah. So again, simple. Like, give us the list, let's compare. Within 8 years, you're not supposed to sell the RDP. It should actually be impossible to transfer the RDP. So 8 years back and go, cool, give me allocations for the last 8 years, and let's see where these RDP houses actually landed up. Again, not a difficult process. It's manual labor of comparing one to the other.
Exactly. And Bruno, I think what's important to talk about while we're talking about this, so I do want to invite everybody again, if you've been in a situation like this, or you are in a situation like this, comment on Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll find you there. Otherwise, there's going to be a million calls. So let's find a trail of people that's commenting on this video, Facebook or YouTube, and just tell us the story quickly, times and things like that, and let's see what we can do. But also, if you do own an RDP house and you do want to sell the property, or even more importantly, you want to buy a property from another person, guys, please remember, to go to the police station and do an affidavit isn't the way we should sell property in South Africa. It is not legal. So if you pay all the money, you go to the police station, you do an affidavit, it means nothing. So what happens, and unfortunately, we see that in both our firms, you've paid the money, you've done the affidavit, but the property doesn't get transferred to you. Now the previous owner doesn't want to vacate, or the people in the property doesn't want to vacate. We need to do the legal eviction through court. We can't do an eviction if you're not the legal owner of the property. And the only way you're a legal owner of a property is if you transferred the property in the deeds office. So it's important to be aware of this. There has to be a proper, in writing, sale agreement, an offer to purchase, a deed of sale, whatever the relevant documents called in your context, and then it has to be transferred in the deeds office by a conveyancing attorney. So if you not had an attorney involved in the process and the deeds office wasn't involved, that property isn't legally yours, even if you paid the money, even if you have an affidavit. Even if both parties know about it, that's not a legal transfer of the property. So be very careful when buying properties that you're actually transferring the property correctly. So if the previous party doesn't want to vacate, you can evict them legally by court order, or you can at least compel delivery of the property, and it gives you obviously the rights to act as the owner.